Hi, it's Kim Petras.
This is Melissa Etheridge.
This is Tegan and Sarah, and you're listening to Pride History.
Coming up, we'll be sharing 7 stories from the history of LGBTQ+ liberation.
From the protests of Sir Lady Java all the way through to today.
We'll also be sharing some of our favorite songs from these eras to give you a feel for the moment in time.
So, to set the stage, here is a song from me, One Way Out. In October 1979, just months after a jury gave the man who murdered Harvey Milk a slap on the wrist, an extraordinary thing happened in Washington, D.C. Nearly 100,000 queer people coming from each of the 50 states, Puerto Rico, D.C., and at least a dozen world nations descended on the U.S. Capitol to march, mourn, protest, and party. It seemed like everyone was in town. And while the community was realistic about its past and present, there was hope for the future. Of all the speakers who addressed the massive crowd on the mall that day, it was Audre Lorde whose message hit with the greatest force. "I am proud," she announced, "to raise my voice here this day as a Black lesbian feminist, committed to struggle for a world where all our children can grow free from the diseases of racism, of sexism, of classism, and of homophobia, for those oppressions are inseparable." The question, Lorde said, must always be, what kind of a world do we want to be a part of? And no matter the answer, we all have a responsibility to translate it into daily action. Our commitment to freedom must be part of our everyday lives. Tomorrow and the day after, and next week and next year. In the spirit of that message, here's We Are Family by Sister Sledge. AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, better known as ACT UP, exploded out of New York City in early 1987. Inspired by the militancy of earlier activists, playwright Larry Kramer turned a speech at the local LGBT center into a revolutionary call for action. The devastation of AIDS would only get worse, he said, unless and until community members channeled their rage and fought back. And so they did. Within weeks, hundreds of activists, some of whom had been in the liberation struggle for decades, some of whom had never been to a protest, all of whom came looking for meaning in the middle of a plague, were preparing for battle. Above all, ACT UP, which really was more of a movement than an organization, empowered individuals to fight back in whatever way they felt most productive. Spreading around the world, ACT UP produced hundreds of affinity groups of artists, activists, researchers, and street warriors. If you had an idea, one ACT UPper recalled, you could do it. In public, ACT UP aimed to disrupt society's business-as-usual attitude, communicating that real people, friends and family with lives that mattered, were dying while the government did nothing. And ACT UP took no prisoners, shutting down Wall Street, the FDA, Grand Central Station, downtown Chicago, much of San Francisco, LA, and Paris. They had to. It was life or death. And though it wasn't perfect, ACT UP got results, forcing governments and pharmaceutical companies to listen to those with HIV/AIDS, to adapt policy and regulations to the urgent needs of a community too long ignored. ACT UP put medical treatment in the hands of the patients, Dr. Anthony Fauci said in 2002, and that is the way it ought to be. Here is a song for the fighters, Freedom 90 by the great George Michael. Thanks for listening to Pride History. We hope these stories show you the incredible progress we've made and the work we've still left to do. If you're interested in hearing more, we have Pride History playlists from countries all over the world. Just search Pride History or ask Alexa to learn more.